We have been talking about Abraham and his family's journey after God calls them out of their homeland. God had made promises that we have been following throughout the chapters of Genesis. Abraham would be a father, and the reason that his generations after had lands in the future. We have witnessed incredible moments of faith as this family picked up and left everything that they knew for a future they couldn't see. We've also witnessed moments of deception and uncertainty when Abraham and Sarah doubted the things that God assured them of. Last Sunday, we focused on someone new. We talked about a woman who had been caught in the middle of other people's decisions. Abraham and Sarah had been waiting for the child they were promised. But their faith wasn't fully in God. Instead of relying on God's timing and his plans, Sarah and Abraham chose to do things their own way a number of times. They tried to fulfill promises made to them on their own terms. It never went well, and the choices were often ones that had painful consequences for those they involved. This time, it was an Egyptian servant caught in the crossfire. Abraham and Sarah's doubt led to a woman called Hagar becoming involved with one of their schemes. The couple was unsure how God was going to work through them to fulfill his promises. In fact, their idea of what God would do was so narrow, they thought they had to help out. Maybe someone else needed to have this miracle child. Hagar became Abraham's wife to meet expectations of what they thought the promise had to look like. Of course, this isn't how things were intended to happen. Nothing is impossible for God. And so giving Sarah a child of her own wasn't beyond his reach. Relationships break down with this mistake. Abraham and Sarah had forced Hagar into a terrible position. Once she became pregnant, the reactions of everyone involved were the wrong ones. Hagar ran away and found herself in the wilderness trying to cope with brokenness and uncertainty. But in the middle of a horrible situation, she found something amazing. Hagar wasn't neglected in her moments of heartbreak, even though Abraham and Sarah hadn't been the ones to pursue her. This young woman recognized God was watching over her. He held a love for her that transcended the situation she was facing. God redeemed the mess Hagar found herself in and restored her in a beautiful display of grace. After this dramatic encounter, we find ourselves back at the reason why Abraham and Sarah did what they did. They wanted to know God would still provide what he said he would. They were waiting for their child. Yet again, rather than scolding the couple or dwelling on the disappointment of their failure, God reassures them. He reminds Abraham nothing was forgotten. God goes a step further by entering into yet another covenant with Abraham. Today, we're going to look at this covenant and see why it's so important. We're going to talk about how God's children are set apart. We'll also see that a relationship with God is built on sacrifice. We'll start with how God's children are set apart. Let's look at the first verses of Genesis 17 for our context. Verses 1 through 4 say, "When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, 'I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly.' Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, 'Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations.'" I'd like to bring attention to the two sides of this agreement we're finding here. The first is the condition Abraham receives for entering into this covenant. Walk before God and be blameless. Abraham was being told he needed to devote himself to the relationship God had forged with him. He shouldn't stray, rely on other people, or try to make things happen by himself, as he had done in the past. A few things had to be clarified for Abraham. He and his wife had dealt with doubts and questions up to this point. They were wondering about God's role in the covenant that he had already established. This misunderstanding was going to be cleared up right at this moment. The one to uphold and ensure the covenant and promises were fulfilled would be none but God himself. Abraham had no power to ensure he'd become a father of nations. Sarah wasn't able to bring about miracles when no child seemed to be in their future. No one else could do what God was going to do, despite their best efforts. Abraham's life is a wonderful example of God's goodness and provision. It also offers an important reminder for those who choose to walk in God's plans and promises. God does provide, and he does protect. He weaves together plans for us and guards our steps, just like he did for Abraham. But along with that incredible blessing, we also have the obligation Abraham had. We need to walk blamelessly before God. We need to set ourselves apart for the plans that he has for us. We also have to rely on his goodness to see us through. Abraham is further set apart in the next verses of Genesis 17. Verses 5 through 7 say, "No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your offspring after you, throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you." This act of separation shouldn't be taken lightly. The seriousness of it can be seen as Abraham receives a new name. He's becoming someone new in the covenant made between himself and God. His encounter with the one who created the universe was meant to fully transform who he is. As Christians, this same separation and process begins to take place. We are set apart in the world when we enter into a covenant relationship with God. When we become God's children, we're not actually asked to legally change our name. That would be a whole lot of work and a lot of trips to government offices that no one would be a fan of. What it means for us today is that we're expected to begin living a different way. We need to act in a way that counters how we lived up to this turning point. God offers his love, his peace, grace, and unmerited favor to those who come to him. But as those who serve him, we're also bound to him alone. This act of being set apart asks us to willingly give up a number of things. Our values, our relationships, and interactions with others become different. The separation can be difficult. Let's look at the words of caution Jesus gives his followers. John 15, verses 18 through 20 say, "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours." Following God has never been the easy choice. God didn't promise a life without trials or tribulations. We can see the warnings Jesus gave were merited when we look at the world around us, even today. Believers face persecution because of this choice to be different and to be set apart for the God who loves us. This isn't something to fear or disappoint us. We can look at everything happening and still have hope. We know that whatever we may face here is nothing compared to the love we receive in turn. Jesus gave his life for us, and so we are willing to surrender whatever we may have, however much or little that might be. This ties in with our other point. Building a relationship with God requires sacrifice. Abraham had just been set apart. Now he's asked to show his commitment to the covenant that God is creating. Genesis 17, 9 through 10 lay out the instructions and the importance of them being followed. They say, "And God said to Abraham, 'As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you, throughout their generations. This is my covenant, which you shall keep, between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you.'" The act of circumcision was a physical sign of the covenant between God and Abraham's household. It was a way to declare they had chosen to follow God, and that God had also chosen them. For centuries, this is how people set themselves apart. This practice in and of itself isn't one that all believers observe today. But that doesn't mean the significance of sacrifice has been negated. In fact, a much more important emphasis was taught by Paul in the book of Romans. Chapter 2, verses 28 and 29 say, "A person is not a Jew who is one only outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly. And circumcision is circumcision of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God." When a new thing is beginning, something is either changing or coming to an end. Christians are no different. Setting ourselves apart for God is more than just a vow with words or a singular physical act. It's a lifestyle. It's something we emphasize with the way we live and what we give up. We tithe from what we earn because our treasure is in Him. We give up harmful habits and hobbies to signify the life we've chosen. This conveys the sense of sacrifice God gave for us to become a part of His family. The process we go through is a lot like the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly. The insect starts out with a distinct form. There are no wings or beautiful colors in the beginning that we associate butterflies with. This is because a major process of transformation needs to occur first. The caterpillar hasn't reached its potential yet. It has to give up its current form to become something new. It gives up what it has so that it can become what it was meant to be. The caterpillar goes through a process of isolating itself, shedding its skin, and taking on another form. The result is usually unrecognizable. Everything changed in this process that started inside a cocoon. From the inside out, Christians are going through a metamorphosis too. We need to show the world we have died to sin and have come back to life new with Christ. It might be difficult. Some of the things we give up and lose have been important for a long time. Where do our values lie when we look at the covenant relationship God offers us? Are we willing to give up what we have so that we can be who God intends for us to be? We talked about how God's children are set apart and that our relationship with God is built on sacrifice. How do you show the world that you've been set apart? Do you answer to the new name that God gives his children? Showing others you've chosen a different path can be difficult and painful. Sacrifice might mean letting go of something you care about. It could mean surrendering what meant a lot to you. It's developing a new lifestyle and offering the fullness of your heart to God. We can be encouraged even as we give these things up. The sacrifice and dedication that we're asked to show is only a fraction of what God gives for us. It's only a taste of what he gives to the children he loves. This sacrifice of lifestyle is an opportunity to take part in that same loving surrender that Jesus offered as he was beaten and killed for us. That physical sign of his love for us couldn't ever be topped. What are the things we're willing to die to and to give up in the light of what God has done? What are we willing to surrender to the one who plans our steps and guards our path? Consider this morning what your lifestyle reflects. Have you circumcised your heart for the Lord? Is anything keeping you from fully dedicating yourself to God? He died on a cross to give us the opportunity to be in this covenant relationship with him. What will your response be to that sacrifice? If you want to learn more about following Jesus or you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Also, if you have prayer requests, please let us know by sending us a message. We would love to support and encourage you.